It's my great pleasure to welcome the rest of the panelists today. Unfortunately, Dr. Shoma Chatterjee has had a personal small little glitch, so she can't make it. And we've got a very able person here, scholar, who will be reading her paper. And this is Shaptaparna Roy. May I request Gopalda, Mr. Gopal Lahiri, to please come, and Professor Shayantan Dasgupta. Thank you, Shayantan. And Dr. Choitali Moitro. It is actually a great pleasure because it's not very usual that one gets to applaud and celebrate a book launch of someone you've admired as an academic of great aplomb, someone articulate, compassionate, wise, inclusive, a great poet, a great teacher, and pretty much a celebrity in the academic circles, not just in Kolkata, but as I was saying a little while ago, in places over puddles and ponds. So, a warm welcome to you all, or should I say a cool welcome. It's been a really sweltering day. And this particular book actually is very timely because there are films and there are scholarly works, there are novels which are hitting the bookshelves or the tips of your fingers on the net, which talk about a lot of the very pressing issues of marginalization, of identity, of loss, of integrity, and being a part of a large whole when you're actually living on the margins. So it is, I think, to Dr. Sanjukta Dasgupta's credit that she has so easily brought the epics into our everyday discussion with this book of poems, Eklavya Speaks. More about the book later. Just wanted to give you a flow chart of how we want this evening to proceed. So it's incumbent upon us to introduce the speakers, which we will do. We will have the first two speakers, Mr. Gopal Lahiri and Dr. Mrs. Shoma Chatterjee in absentia, whose paper is going to be read, as I said, by Shaptaparna. After that, we have Shaptaparna reading two poems, and then the other two speakers, Professor Shayantan Dasgupta and then Dr. Choitali Moitro. I'll start the proceedings by saying a few words, hard to say a few words, about a scholar of such incredible veracity and verisimilitude as Dr. Sanjukta Dasgupta, professor, former head, Department of English, former dean, Faculty of Arts, Calcutta University, and a Fulbright Fellow. She's a poet, short story writer, critic, and translator. She was a member of the General Council of Sahitya Academy, New Delhi, and convener, English Advisory Board, Sahitya Academy, New Delhi. She's the president of the Intercultural Poetry and Performance Library, better known as the IPPL, Kolkata. She's a member of the advisory committee of the Gyanpith Award. She received the IWSEF Women Achievers Award in 2019, the WEI Kamladas Poetry Award in 2020, and the Ethos Literary Award in 2022, and was conferred the Governor's Scroll of Honor in 2024. Congratulations. Professor, you have an inimitable scholar here. Professor Dasgupta has 27 published books. Her 9 published books of poetry are Snapshots, Dilemma, First Language, More Light, Lakshmi Unbound, Sita's Sisters, Unbound, New and Selected Poems, edited by Joydeep Sarangi and Shongita Sanyal, one of my colleagues at Loreto College. Welcome, Sangeeta, and thank you for coming. May I ask Shaptaparna to do the honors, I think, and then...
A very good evening to this august audience. It is an absolute honor to be able to introduce Dr. Julie Mehta, the eminent compere, for today's evening. Dr. Julie Mehta has master's and PhD degrees from the Department of English, University of Toronto. She conceptualized and taught the Chancellor's endowed course on Asian cultures and literatures in Canada at University of Toronto for several years. Specialist in postcolonial feminist studies and world and diasporic literatures, Julie Mehta is a Mary H. Beatty and David Chu Fellow from Toronto. Dr. Mehta is the author of Dance of Life, a seminal study of the resurrection of Cambodian culture and the arts post-genocide, and the best-selling biography of Hansen Strongman of Cambodia. She now teaches English at the master's level at Loreto College, Kolkata, and is widely published in international journals. She is the literary columnist for T2, The Telegraph, and conceptualizes and anchors Bengal Club's book festival every month. Co-edited with Harish Mehta, her most recent compendium on the Sri Lankan Canadian Booker Prize winning writer Michael Ondaatje is being published by Routledge UK in October this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I pass on the baton to ma'am.
Thank you.
I can see all my friends. If I sit, I won't be able to see them. So, hello everyone. A very good evening. I'm absolutely delighted that you could come despite the thunder and lightning, thankfully not in South Calcutta. And despite it being a weekday evening, I know that many of you even bunked your schools and colleges and various other institutions for the whole day to be here at 6 in the evening. Thank you very much. I can see friends from my school and college days, relatives, and my young poet Brigid from IPPL, Intercultural Poetry and Public and Performance Library. Along with that, my super efficient and highly professional publisher friends, Sri Twanmi and Shupriyo Chakraborty from Pen Prince are here, who helped in the birthing of Eklavya Speaks. And there are friends from the University of East Anglia. It's a huge surprise that you could be here this evening. I'm so happy. And of course, many members of the Bengal Club who I have met many times, who some of them I'm getting acquainted with, and also young friends from the Statesman here. And I would also like to thank my husband, without whose support it would not have been possible to bring argumentative and talkative subalterns, Eklavya, Shambhuka, Shikhandi, Karna, Birshamunda, and Chuni Kotal, into Salon 175 of the aristocratic Bengal Club. This event has been made possible due to the enthusiastic support of my friend, scholar, writer, and critic Julie Banerjee Mehta. She is the prime ideator and curator of the book club. Julie Mehta, as everyone in Kolkata and I think now throughout India and the world know, is an outstanding curator. Thanks to the internet, everybody knows about the fantastic book club events that you organize. And it is her creative dynamism which has overwhelmingly impacted the profile of the Bengal Club Book Club. Yes, and library. I must also thank the panelists here. My friend Shoma Chatterjee this morning called me around 10:30 or 11. She had a bad fall. She is unable to come. And which, of course, was, I was here for her event on Amitabh Bachchan only shortly, about a month back. And along with Shoma Chatterjee, thankfully, we have her responses to the book, which she has emailed to us. So I think we will love to share that. And then there is poet Gopal Lahiri, one of the senior poets of IPPL, and who recently was awarded the Jayanto Mahapatra National Award for the first time. So, and then Shayantan Dasgupta, who is really for me a little boy, but then because I was present at his PhD Viva examination, but he doesn't look like that anymore. Yes, he's become absolutely brilliant in the work he does, and he is one of the ideators and a fantastic curator of the Translation Studies Center that he runs at the Department of Comparative Literature of Jadavpur University. And Choitali Moitro teaches at, Dr. Choitali Moitro teaches at a number of universities, and number really. I've seen everybody says, Choitali Di. And everybody, even for this program, everybody said that we call Choitali Di. So, and she is very much a part of the book club, and she's absolutely brilliant because very recently at the Sanskrit College and University launch of my book, Choitali spoke so well with so much of insight about Eklavya, which I cannot claim the book can really respond to the sort of your scholarship on Eklavya. So, and of course, this evening my research scholar, Shaptaparna Roy, will be reading a few poems. And as you have seen her here, Shaptaparna has been very, very accommodative. I think she got a number of phone calls since morning. Shaptaparna, you have to do that. Shaptaparna, you have to do something else. And she said, so I don't read the poems. I said, you will also read the poems. So thank you, Shaptaparna, for being here. So many have asked why I have been zeroing in on mythic figures in my last 4 books of poetry. Incidentally, Eklavya Speaks is my 9th book of poems. After my stridently feminist books of poems like Lakshmi Unbound, Sita Sisters, and Indomitable Draupadi, I felt a compelling urge to expand my explorations and representations of the oppressed, exploited, marginalized minorities thrust into the peripheries of my beloved country. Gender neutrality was unavoidable, as men, women, and non-binaries are all helpless victims of the patriarchal system, not only in India, but all over the world. Myths provided me with an enabling opportunity of connecting with oral traditions and our cultural nurturance, teeming with stories about countless gods and goddesses, remote controlled by a super divine trinity. Among gods, too, some are more equal than others. It is impossible to miss the gender, class, and caste hierarchy in the divine structures. I grew up with these mythic stories. Social conditioning, however, failed. So, in the poems in Eklavya Speaks, I decided to focus not just on gender inequality. I tried to address caste hierarchy as well as economic class structures. In fact, as we are all aware, class, caste, and gender are in a viscous embrace. The empirical and the epistemic data, globally and locally, prove this all the time. My book, Eklavya Speaks, is not a biography. It does not trace the life of Eklavya, the life he led, the battles he fought, his support of the Kauravas, or how and why Lord Krishna killed him. But as my primary voice, I chose Eklavya. And why? I belong to the mid-20th century generations where parents would routinely narrate stories from the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, and also Thakur Majhuli, to the children in their homes ad infinitum. There was no running away from them. The story of Eklavya was often referred to at home and in school as an example of unquestioned obedience to the wishes of a mentor, teacher, instructor. In Eklavya's case, the stellar teacher of archery, Dronacharya, had not even taught Eklavya directly for a single second. And yet Dronacharya did not suffer any qualms of conscience in asking Eklavya to donate his right thumb as Guru Dakshina, as a respectful donation to his teacher. I chose this timeless, chilling moment in the epic as a symbol and metaphor of class and caste oppression, which unfortunately persists even to this day. In my poems in Eklavya Speaks, I use creative freedom and poetic license in my endeavor to grant agency to the exploited, marginalized minorities in the epics and myths who, though visible, remain docile, abject, silent members of our social ecosystem. As a teenager, I was deeply troubled by Eklavya's submissiveness, voicelessness, and unquestioned obedience. During those days of ignorance, I was not aware of systemic otherization at all. Yet a feeling of inexplicable resistance to this succumbing to caste and class authority troubled my mind for decades. So, in defiance of all platitudes in myths and epics, the algorithms of the pre-industrial age, I decided in the 21st century, Eklavya should become vocal. He should speak, question, challenge, and demand answers about his Sudra caste status, his invisibility, his voicelessness, and the sly way in which, through generations and centuries, thousands of Ekalavyas have been shorn of their extraordinary talents and powers and brought down to their knees by those who exerted their dominance due to the accident of birth, the Brahminical legacy. This is what I learned from my soulmate, Rabindranath Tagore, and not just Edward Said and Simone de Beauvoir. Remember Tagore in his poem Bharatbarsha, many of you are familiar with that poem, welcoming all races and religions to assemble together in a communitarian spirit. Aryans, non-Aryans, Hindus, Muslims and Christians. Only in the outstanding conclusive lines of that poem, Tagore asks the Brahmins to cleanse and purify their minds before joining the assembly. Esho he arjo, esho anarjo, Hindu Musalman, esho esho aaj, tumi Ingraj, esho esho Christian, esho Brahmon, shuchi kori mon, dharo hath shabakar. So in conclusion, I would just like to add that I hope you will notice that in the 21st century, in these poems, Eklavya not just claims identity and agency. Eklavya not just speaks. Notice Eklavya's unprecedented mobility. Eklavya, this evening, has pole vaulted into the super elite. Some even say it has its nose in the stratosphere. The Grand Heritage Bengal Club. And that perhaps is a fitting rebirth for Eklavya in the 21st century, both in terms of space and time. I'll read a section of the poem. Thank you. So, the poem Eklavya Speaks, which is the title poem, is a rather long one. And when I started writing it, I suddenly felt that probably I'm writing an epic poem like the Ramayana. And so it became long and repetitive. Yes? But the advantage of writing a poem and then reading it out on your own is that you can do self-editing. And that's precisely what I will do. I will read a section of that poem, not the entire one. Eklavya Speaks. So this is where Eklavya is really becoming vocal and not only speaking, but speaking in English. Yes? So here it is. Sir, you were my mentor, my teacher, my guide, my guru. Though you never taught me, I learned from you by just watching you. I learned from you by overhearing your instructions to the princely Pandavas. Sir, then on that glorious day when you spoke to me for the first time, I kept my distance. I knew you would not hug me. I knew I could not touch your feet. I was an untouchable after all. So when I said I learned the art of archery by watching you, I looked upon you as my guide, my guru, my guiding star. Your smile was so fake. Your fake smile stabbed my eager heart. And then my icon, my mentor, you said, don't you think it's time for you to pay your tutor the fees he deserves for teaching you so well? Alas, speech was given to man to conceal his thoughts. His thoughts, mark you. Yes? So, you meant Guru Dakshina. Of course, Guru Dakshina is a teacher's due. Though many do not ask for it, you did, my icon, my mentor, my guide. Sir, I trembled from head to foot. What could I give you that you did not possess already? My poverty never seemed so painful as I could not think of offering anything of value to my guru to whom I had dedicated my heart and mind. Sir, what can I give you as Guru Dakshina, my revered teacher, my brilliant guide? What can I give you that a guru like you would consider worthy, dear sir? Your steady voice did not tremble at all, as you, my remote guru, my inspiration, my icon, my God, simply said, give me your right thumb, Eklavya. No one protested. Everyone watched as with one unerring stroke, I severed my thumb. It quivered in protest, red with fresh, flowing subaltern blood. I offered you my Guru Dakshina as you desired. How could I disobey you, my Guru, my mentor and guide? You deleted me with such superb craft of words. Sir, why does speech conceal rather than express thoughts? Your fake smile was so unbearable. I dropped my bow and arrows on the floor of the forest and walked away without turning. Sir, why did you take my thumb away? Sir, why did you dwarf yourself? Sir, you are no longer my godly Guru. Sir, you are now my target. Sorry, sir, I cannot forgive nor forget anymore. The sun also rises for us. I may claim your thumb someday. Thank you.
Shangjutadi, what you've done is you've made the incredible happen. You've got a subaltern speaking in English at the Bengal Club. No mean task. Well, before I hand it over to the panelists, I would like to say that Shambhuka's story that is so poignant and so resonating with our milieu right now is also a story that I didn't come upon while I was a student in India. At an international Ramayana conference in University of British Columbia in the year 2000 or 2001, I was presenting a paper on the Cambodian, Riamker, and that's the Ramayana from Cambodia, and then the Ramayana from Thailand. And you know, very spiffy, it was a wonderful atmosphere with the sea and the sky, the Rose Garden and the Asian Institute of Research at UBC. And then the opening remarks came from a scholar that I think Shangjukta-di and some of us here in this room full of academics will recognize, Dr. Paula Richman. She's a scholar on the Ramayana of Valmiki, but more on the other Ramayanas. And she pointed out so many details about Shambhuka, and I began to get very interested in the subject. More so when I came upon Mondakranta Bose in person, where in the book, in 2004, Ramayana Revisited, she asks the question, why can't I, a Sudra, ask a question? And that Sudra was Shambhuka. Today, that idea of the Sudra being a post-colonialist, I'm always subconsciously thinking of writers such as Patrick White, David Malouf from Australia, thinking of Arundhati Roy, who talks about Velutha unendingly in The God of Small Things. And you find that, as Shangjukta-di was pointing out today, in the canon of literature all over the world, and I'm also thinking of the privilege of being taught by indigenous North American tribal writers, whether they are Ojibwe or Cherokee. Chotobala Amra Shuntam, they are called Red Indians. That's a pejorative term. You can't use that anymore. But it's the same story, repeated by cultures which have been colonized or cultures which have been totally emaciated. And what is that story of Shambhuka is what I'll give back to someone, as I said, I admire greatly. Poor Shambuka. He did not want to continue with the accident of birth, stamped on every pore of his youthful body. To be a Shudra was just no fun. All the non-Shudras behaved as if Shambuka was a stray pariah, a dog, to be shooed and kicked off. I'll complain to God. He will understand. He's so full of care and compassion. If I call God, He will get me out from my Shudra chains, my body tarred all over. Stigma and Shudra stamp on every sin-free pore of my young body. No fault of mine. He prayed. He meditated. Shambuka lost himself in his dialogue with God. Dear God, the healer of all human grief, let me enter heaven. Release me from this hell on earth. Shambuka was deep in his sincere dhyana, immersed in spiritual trance, like all sages who levitate to a space beyond the reach of lesser mortals, writhing in mortal coils. But Shambuka made a cardinal error. He was not expected to meditate, nor dedicate himself to God, nor dare to enter heaven. Immersed in his spiritual plea, telling God about cruel and callous discrimination, though everyone's blood bore the same color. Shambuka did not hear any footsteps. He had not heard the chariot wheels. He did not hear the metallic rasp of the sharp and shining sword pulled out of the scabbard. The cold steel came down on his neck at the speed of light. Shambuka's head lay in front of his upright body. It streamed a fountain of blood. A king beheaded, a poor Shudra youth, for desiring to attain heaven. Shambuka's futile prayers went unanswered. Alas, the silence still remains, an indelible question mark in the annals of time. Thank you. We turn to Mr. Gopal Lahiri, a bilingual poet, critic, editor, writer, and translator with 30 books published, including 8 solo, jointly edited books. His poetry and prose are published across more than 100 journals and anthologies globally. His poems are translated in 18 languages and published in 16 countries. He's been nominated for the Pushcart Prize for Poetry 2021. He has received the Setu Excellence Award from Pittsburgh, US in Poetry in 2020. He has been conferred the first Jayanto Mohapatra National Award on Literature in 2024, as Jean-Jacques Tadi pointed out, for his significant contribution in Indian English writing. His collection of poems, Alleys Are Filled with Future Alphabets, has received Pan-Asian Ukiyoto Awards. What a pleasure and an honor. Please go ahead.
Well, good evening to everyone. A respected chair on the dais, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'll be speaking mainly of this particular book, Eklavya Speaks, not only of a few poems, but as a poet's perspective, how the poet Sangyukta Dasgupta, we feel that where she is. To start with, we all know that she is a very eminent academic, also a feminist scholar, poet, critic, and many other hats in her head. But this particular book, when I start to read, before that I have been following her since 2017 when that book Lakshmi Unbound came. And after that, few books which she mentions already about that Unbound, Shita's Sisters, and this particular, and Indomitable Draupadi, and this book, Eklavya Speaks. All these books which I have read and I have followed continuously for the last 7-8 years. Before that, of course, I didn't have much acquaintance of her poetry because I was not here in Bombay, and so there, of course, there's a Bombay poets were all there, so we were very totally focused on the Bombay poets there. What I feel about her is that to write is to notice everything down to its atoms. They watch what I watch. They don't see what I see. But she doesn't believe a theology of silence or the eschatology of shrug that you can very easily understand to read her poetry. I'll name few writers and poets whom I feel very close to her writing, if not the theme, but the freedom of writing, freedom of mind. Susan Sontag, the American activist and writer, she said that a writer, I think, is someone who pays attention to the world. Then Anna Akhmatova, she wrote that your voice is wild and simple. You are untranslatable into any one tongue. Then Rita Dove, in her books, like few poems which I have read, On the Bus and The Canary, there also she talks about the freedom of mind because she is very proud of her Afro-American origin. So these are the poets which I feel very akin to Sangyukta Dasgupta's poetry because she wants to communicate, she wants to converse with her readers, and there is no place for a writer or a poet who depicts her journey from one solitude to the other solitude. So these are the different things which we can feel when you read Professor Sangyukta Dasgupta. This book contains about 86, which I got rapid fire poems. Daruwala, poet Daruwala once says that she talks about her poetry that trigger tense. But the fireman poet, as she is, the important thing is the message. She sends through her engaging poems. That's very important. She is not writing only the words or few lines or deconstruct about the mythical characters or fictional character or about the other people which she talks about here, the subalterns, the marginalized people whom we always neglect, always stigmatize, always say they and we. So those separation is always there. So this book is very important on that context. And she mentioned in our introduction that like Orhan Pamuk's literary activism, it's a healing engagement, which is very interesting. She believes that literary activism is an awareness campaign. So when I read her poems, you feel that you are getting elevated. You know that certain things which we don't really bother, that issues, those issues will come to your mind and you will sit upright and then you feel very uncomfortable that what we are doing here. And this book, there is a caste, class, and gender and religion biases which she mentioned, so I'm not going to those part. But in the first poem, especially if anybody reads the first poem, she mentions in one section that the accident of birth, no accident could be more catastrophic than the accident of birth. So this is very important because as a lower caste people or as a subaltern, as if their curse is that they are born in those families, and that's why there's an accident of birth. And then in another stanza, she mentioned that the embryo and the fetus are so dumb, they could have committed suicide right away instead of being born to die. So this is the main, the signature lines which I could feel about the other people, about the subalterns. Then she always wants that there should be an upheaval, a churning, a whirlpool in your mind, because you should not sit idle. She wants to act on our conscience. She wants to see that we should not be very comfortable with our life because there are so many things are happening. So one poem, The King and the Poet, she wrote that just pleading for justice, nothing more. So that is important, that in most of the poems, as a poet, she is pleading for justice and nothing more. And then if you, this text, if you break into different parts, you can see we are talking about the Mahabharata epic, that Shambhuka, Shikhandi, Karna, Dronacharya, and then Eklavya. So you can dissect those characters and you can come out with your own thoughts, your own interpretation. So no text is very fixed. It is always vulnerable. It all depends on your interpretation. And how you can, with that, you can go close to your heart, to the people. This, he says, my guru, my guiding star, your smile was so fake. This is, of course, a modern day thinking here, but you can understand why poet wants to write these lines here. In the title poem, we have already seen that this Eklavya, the Gurudakshina Eklavya, which poet mentioned that it is actually, it's not a great act of sacrifice, but it is an exploitation. So this point is very important here. And about her poetry, there are 2-3 things which I mentioned. One is the rhythm. That is very important to read her poems, because nowadays most of the contemporary poets are writing on free verse. So the rhythm is one of the important part. One poem which I called as stripped down poetry, which actually stripped down to words only. The poet, I read a section of that. The whole poem is In Search of Peace. Sabre rattling, groans of drones, zooming of bombs and bullets, those divine teardrops, glistening dewdrops, heal the angry, hungry earth. The calm, ragged shawl of peace stretches itself like a desperate mother, soothing the grumblings, rumblings, crumbling of a sadist, masochist, homicidal, suicidal, suffering, death. So these are the poetry she always want to write, that stripped down to words. No aesthetics of a metaphor, no labored images. These are very simple but very direct, just like a plain speaking, like any prose you can say. But there is always that rhythm is there which gives that poetic flavor. Well, we know that Octavio Paz once told that poetry is basically a synthesis of whatever you write, and prose is basically the analysis of your text. But here, what is happening that she has also analyzed, because her poetry is not only always synthesis, it is also part of analysis. We can always read and see that there is an insight that drives the narrative always. Step by step, line by line, word by word, you can feel that here is a poet who is acting not only on the words, but beyond that, beyond your ideas, beyond your thoughts, and moreover, the rhythm which she wants to hit the bottom of your thoughts, and also she wants to tell these are very charged line, but you have to listen to. Moreover, one thing is that her poem you have to read aloud. You cannot just sitting at the corner of the room and read this book. It's impossible. You have to go out, you have to read aloud, you have to communicate to the world that I'm writing this for you and you only. And it seems that poetry is a great way for me to express myself. Whenever something is bothering, I pull out my journal and jot down a poem. I love any type of writing, but I can really hear my voice through the words that I write in my mind. And not everything is very negative here. There are two things which I'll mention, two sections of poems where she is very, very positive. She said that in last poem, Phoenix, that I died with them all, but my soul left my body only to re-enter it. I rise from my ashes, resurrected. And then the last few lines, let the sun rays, this is a different poem, Citizen, let the sun rays light up, let the lights dispel the darkness of doom. So with this, I will conclude my talk mentioning that she is a poet which we cannot ignore or bypass. She is there and you have to listen to her. Thank you very much.
Listen to her? Yes, you have to listen to her. Thank you for that extraordinary, comprehensive and compelling response. So may I call on this wonderful academic, translator, poet, poetry performer, Shoptaparna Roy, holds a doctoral degree in women's studies, is an empaneled pedagogy trainer and has seminal projects, publications to her credit. She's also an executive committee member of the Intercultural Poetry and Performance Library, ICCR Kolkata, and she will be reading us a response from Dr. Shoma A. Chatterjee's thoughts on Shongjukta-di's book.
Thank you very much, Julie ma'am, for such a generous introduction. Though Shoma Chatterjee is a very well-known film critic, yet I would like to formally introduce her to the audience. Shoma Chatterjee is a journalist, author, and film scholar based in Kolkata. She has won the National Award for Best Writing on Cinema twice, among several Lifetime Achievement Awards. She has authored 32 books on Indian cinema, gender, and short fiction. She has an MA in economics, an MEd in education, and a PhD in history. She has juried at several film festivals in India and beyond. I take the privilege of presenting Shoma Chatterjee's discursive take on Eklavya Speaks. Shongjukta Dasgupta, in spite of having been a hardcore academic and a brilliant scholar of English literature, lets the political dimension of her personality ride free of academic inhibitions and yet reveal layer by layer her acknowledgement, recognition, and strong comment on international issues, on national issues, converting her passion for language into a knife, a sword, an arrow, and a whiplash, as and when she chooses to draw from her armory to hit, kill, hurt, injure, and scar as and when necessary. Mythology has had a significant influence on poetry throughout history, with poets drawing inspiration from various mythological traditions. Mythological references in poetry play an important role in conveying complex themes and concepts, adding depth and richness to the poetic language. Some examples are Eurydice to Orpheus by Robert Browning, A Hymn to Bacchus by Robert Herrick, Argus by Alexander Pope, Orpheus by William Shakespeare, and so on. But Shongjukta Dasgupta's aim is to look at mythology as a starting point to question the moral and humane values underscored unquestioningly within mythology, history, society, and politics, beginning perhaps with the lesser known and the less discussed character of Eklavya. Why did Dronacharya ask Eklavya for the thumb of his right hand as Guru Dakshina when Dronacharya was not his guru at all in the real term of the relationship? Because he was afraid of being castigated by Arjuna, who he had promised would become the best archer in history? Or was it because he knew that Eklavya belonged to a lower caste and was not eligible to train in archery? Whatever be it, Eklavya went better and trained himself to shoot his arrow with the help of his forefinger and middle finger, and became as much an expert as he was before he cut off his thumb as Guru Dakshina. The phrase, and I quote, accident of birth, comes up again and again in her writings, and her poetry very seamlessly uses form and content and language like a two-edged sharpened knife, enough to cut through your senses to question yourself about the dramatic changes happening around you, such as COVID or death, and so on. Her poetry strips itself of all ideas of romanticism as we commonly understand it, even of lyricism and odes to nature, but zeroes in on the human, the humane, and the inhuman, not necessarily in that order. In her earlier collections, such as Sita's Sisters and Indomitable Draupadi, her focus was on gender discrimination that was embedded in the lives of most women in Hindu mythology, and questions this not necessarily through a gender lens, but more through the humane lens, questioning the injustice all the way. She throws of poetry as a socio-political statement that is a scathing critique of mythological, political, and great leaders, such as In the Coffee Shop, which surrealistically recreates martyred gods and leaders like Jesus, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Joan of Arc, Abraham Lincoln, John Kennedy, Che Guevara, Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, Steve Biko, and John Lennon gathered to share a cup of coffee in a coffee shop, powerfully suggesting the reality, the suddenness, and the irrational order of death among men today known as martyrs. In Search of Peace, an 11-line poem right after this one talks about the evolution in the weapons and strategy of modern warfare, which has reduced the human identity from an assertion to a question of existence. Tough Nut, again, is an angular attack on poets and poetry. What's in a Name is a satiric attack on how our gods' names are quite casually identified with marginal people whose parents christened them with names like Durga, who cooks, or Lakshmi, who mops, while Saraswati washes clothes. And I quote, the gods laugh as we rant and stride, while we use and abuse them as we do not care nor fear, unquote. Her works bring out the angst the poet holds within. In terms of choice of subjects, Dasgupta covers the entire canvas of human existence as she has garnered through her life, her extensive travels across the world, and a major slice of her life spent in reading, teaching, learning, and relearning not only English literature, which she taught for many years, but all that reaches beyond the framework of literature to touch life, love, tragedy, death, disappointments, and most importantly, disillusions. More power to her pen. Thank you.
If Shomadi, you're on hybrid, and if you're listening, that was a terrific paper. I think most of us would agree with that. You know, Shangjuktadi, there's one point that I think everybody's going to talk about, and that's how with your insertions of mythology, the meta-narrative, the meta-myth, you are still very grounded in modernity. And I'm thinking of a book that I've just finished reading, Remains of the Body, parts of the book. It's still to be launched in Kolkata by Shoikot Mojumdar. And the issue of Shikundi and bisexuality is so much alive and so pertinent when we talk about New Age. New Age, it's not New Age at all. It's very much a question of fractured, fissured identity, which someone like the character Shikundi had to fight in the Mahabharata. So with that little aside, let me just turn to Professor Shayanthan Dasgupta, who teaches comparative literature at Jadavpur University. He's a very well-loved and a very compassionate scholar with a worldview. Comparative literature is supposed to teach you that, and he walks the talk. He heads the Center for Translation of Indian Literature there, and is also joint director of the School of Media, Communication and Culture at Jadavpur University. Being an alumni, I am so proud to welcome Professor Shayanthan Dasgupta.
Good evening. It's a very special occasion being here for this session. I was reading Shangjukta's book, and I was trying to look for labels, how to define this book. And I think two concepts, two words that most aptly sum up this book, the tenor of her poetry here, are number one, humane, and number two, contemporary. And because these are the two pegs that define this book, I think the poetry here will will speak to many of us across the spectrum. It has an almost universal appeal. This is a collection of poetry that celebrates camaraderie, empathy, and inclusivity, as opposed to rivalry, hatred, and divisiveness. The poetry here protests against hierarchies, and it does so because hierarchies seem to contradict the most basic tenets of civilization: human dignity, equality, and natural justice. Those are the themes that struck me when I was reading the poems in this collection. Why is this book so contemporary? It is firstly contemporary because of its response to contemporary events. The poetry that Shangjukta writes draws from the immediate social political context around her. It responds to atrocities on the small people of the world, like the little 12-year-old girl who is brutalized and whose parents do not have the social capital to do anything about it, or the mindless violence in Manipur, or the bombings in Gaza, which results in a loss of human life, of children, or even the George Floyd incident. So that's a huge gamut of incidents that she brings into the theme of her poetry. But all of these are connected in a way. They are all very, very contemporary. At the same time, her poetry, I find, is contemporary because of its treatment, re-invoking and re-inscribing of age-old and well-known narratives, such as the narratives in the Mahabharata, which, as we know, is the master narrative. So many, many narratives that are woven into this one narrative. There's nothing that is not there in the Mahabharata, perhaps. And she draws on many of those narratives, and she creates poetry out of those narratives, problematizing those narratives. We have Karna, we have Eklavya, we have Shambhuka, and when she goes back to these characters, she rewrites these episodes. She seems to be using these characters not just to comment on the old narratives and to seed them with new perspectives, but also to use them as a mirror to unveil contemporary realities. Contemporary realities that are both Indian as well as international. Human suffering is another key theme in the poetry in this book. And this focusing on human suffering can be read on two levels, I think. One, as the poet's quest for a kind of catharsis, a response to our monstrous reality, if I may use the term that Garcia Marquez uses in the context of Latin America, which I think is equally applicable to the South Asian context. But also, poetry for Shangyuktadi seems to be a weapon, a tool of activism. Perhaps these poets are written with the hope that writing on these issues will strike a chord and usher in better times. This is so clear in the way she writes about silence, for instance. Silence kills. Silence marks complicity when we are talking about oppression. That is why when she talks about Manipur, when she talks about Eklavya, so many different contexts, she highlights how important it is to speak out, to bring in a better world. And you can almost hear resounding between the lines of Shangyuktadi's poetry, how many years must one man have before he can hear people cry? How many deaths will it take till he knows that too many people have died? That could refer to Gaza, it could refer to so many different contexts that Shangyuktadi writes about. The way the poetry comments on the fate of Eklavya and Karna and Shambuka highlights the patent injustice that they suffered. But this is also a warning, there is also a warning that this kind of injustice needs to be uprooted from contemporary society. That note of warning is struck in the poem that was read out, one of the poems that was read out, where the poet talks about how Ekalavyas of the world will unite, or again how Eklavya will come back for Drona's thumb. But most importantly, beyond this, it's the human element of these narratives which comes to the forefront, and that is something we cannot lose sight of. Eklavya, Karna, Shambuka, all these characters, all these narratives bring us back to this question of betrayal. It's a betrayal on the part of someone who trusts someone else who is in a position of power. In material terms, it is the practical, the pragmatic party that seems to triumph, because giving away the kavach, the kundal on the part of Karna is going to render him vulnerable. He knows that, so he's not being practical. At the same time, he goes ahead with that because it seems to be his dharma. He sticks to his code of conduct, and that is what seems to make him the hero of Shangyuktadi's poetry as well. This is a cruel, unethical world, but these are characters who come across as heroes because of the way they stick to their sense of ethics. In the same way, there is trenchant comment, criticism of casteism, which seems to continue in India today. There are references, there are poems on Ambedkar, his contribution. There are references, poems on Chuni Kotal, who, as we know, spurred on the Dalit movement in many ways in different parts of the country. So she's bringing the past and the present, the literary world and the quote-unquote real world together, even as she pleads through her poetry for a more inclusive India, where she talks about how all of us sing one national anthem, and as long as we do that, how is it possible to let forces of divisiveness take over? And then again, her poem again about India and Bharat coming together and meeting is so very telling indeed. I think I've run out of time. Thank you very much.
Always a teaser, always making us think, such a thought-provoking and a thoughtful delivery. Thank you so much, Chandanda. I think we are now running dangerously close to that timeline. What we'll do is we'll get Professor Choitali Moitro's views, and then we'll turn back to the wonderful reader of poetry, Shaptaparna, who will read the last poem before we turn it over to our celebrity of the day. Professor Moitro, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. As all of you have heard, I did have the good fortune of taking part in a discussion of Eklavya Speaks, where Shangjukta herself was present. I can see one of my very, very close friend, colleague, Professor Tanya, sitting here. Together with her was Professor Sneha, also in the panel. So whatever thoughts I had will more or less be the same, but I must be honest. After that event, I started reading the poems again. And I think that is the best award a poet can have. It's not just one sort of incident or one function. So, my first sort of take would be what I had said before, that birth is given a special importance when the myth of Eklavya is established. Who was Eklavya? He was the son of a Nishad, Hiranyadhanush, and he was a Shudra. He was also a cousin of Krishna, Pandava and Shishupal. So that is the birth bit. Now, as he grew up, he became a friend of Jarasandha, as most of us know. And when Jarasandha planned an attack on Mathura, he supported Jarasandha. This means he was also a friend of Duryodhana. Now I am going to problematize the issue. When all this happened, Krishna gave him a boon. What was the boon? The boon was that Eklavya would be reborn to be able to kill Drona. So do you see how the concept of friendship is gradually getting problematized, also questioned? I think Shangjukta has that in her mind. When she takes Eklavya, that's the name of the book, but look at Shambuka, look at Karna, look at the other myths that she's making use of. Now, all of us know that Eklavya was born as Drishtadumno, and he was able to behead Drona on the 15th day of the war. Now, after this, we need to remember one important point. Drishtadumna was Ajonija. That means he was not born of a woman's womb. And when Ashwatthama tried to kill Drishtadumna, his body disappeared. So now the question which I'm trying to ask is, what is friendship then? Does friendship exist in layers of disguise? Had Krishna been doing a friendly act when he was giving the boon to Eklavya? Shangjukta is asking questions. I am not answering them, promise. Okay. Now, Shangjukta talks about Eklavya, and I'm quoting her. She says, Eklavya Speaks defines the purpose, perspective, resilience, and relevance of Eklavya in our times. This means Eklavya is also a hero and a performer. Let us look at the cover of this book. All of us will agree that whatever we feel, there is also a subtext of movement, a subtext of protest, a subtext of light in the darkness that the cover has. And this actually sort of leads to two more important points which we should keep in mind when we think of the myth of Eklavya. Number one would be that there is a sense of movement and lightness when Eklavya is thought of. What sort of movement? Just now Shangjukta read out her poem. The severed finger quivered. Look at the word quivered. That means it was a part of the body which was still talking in one sense. So why would such an expression become meaningful if Sangyuktadi doesn't link it up with other non-myth poems? Professor Sayantan had just now been talking about these non-myth poems, and I salutes to him that he included more or less all the poems which should catch the attention of us readers. I feel like talking about one or two poems. One is called The Dinosaur. When I talk of dinosaur, the writer Calvino comes to my mind. Calvino, in his short stories published together called Cosmic Comics, has a story called The Dinosaur. And this story, to sort of give you a summary, tries to say that the bigness of these animals disappeared. But the idea of the bigness they tried to represent remains. It is a part of the earth. That is what comes out in the non-myth poems like dinosaurs and partly in fossils also. The final point I wanted to talk about is the element of hope. See, Sangyuktadi brings in Hemingway in the poem, The Sun Also Rises, in the second last line of the poem, and she is somewhere trying to establish the fact that a day will come when all Ekalavyas will stand up for that quivered finger. That is the reason why you find Ekalavyas coming up in the poems of Malkhan Singh. They come up in the poems of Lakshmi Thakur Charal and many others. Ekalavya is a myth. With the myth comes the element of friendship, the necessity of friendship, and the disguise of friendship in the modern existence. Otherwise, poems like Fair and Lovely, Husband G, Goodbye Mallika, My Grandfather with the S Raj as the metaphor in that poem, and I were poems which would not have found entry in this book. This is the 9th anthology of Sangyuktadi. She could have easily put these poems on the 10th, 11th, 12th. Why here? There must be a reason. Also, there are 2 or 3 poems which we all must try and read. One is called The Coffee Shop. The coffee shop, dear friends, is probably the best and the worst reality that we Kolkatans are facing. I think apart from where I live, every house has a coffee shop. That is the reality now. So what is the subtext? That we are becoming lonelier and lonelier. So many coffee shops are not necessary. If we do not want to spend a slice of time in the coffee shops. So apart from coffee shops, I can't go to the better details now. Religion and politics, a dialogue, and the reluctant voter. I found the reluctant voter to be a particularly funny and insightful poem. All great poems must be funny and insightful, isn't it? Let me end. I will soon run out of time. I had read one poem of Sangyuktadi called Trapped, which I must end with. This particular poem can be treated as a fitting conclusion to what we are trying to understand. And this poem called Trapped can be applied to almost all the characters, all the myths of this book. Mind you, apart from the myths, there is a big bunch of poems pointed out by Professor Sayantan, like Chuni Gotal, like Vidyasagar, like B.R. Ambedkar, and so on. So everywhere there is a trap, seen or unseen. See, you will find that Ekalavya or Karna, they are trapped in their birth, trapped in their genius, trapped in their war, the ancestral prophecy of war. All that is there. And finally, even then, they resonate. They fill us up with a spiritual a sort of resonance, a sense of confidence, which we can never really describe, but we feel that it is there. Jibon Devota happens to be one of the poems. It sort of peeps in one of the poems where Shangyuktadi explains the meaning of Jibon Devota. The last line of Jibon Devota is Nuton bibahe badhibe amaye nobin jibon dore. So, to end my little talk, I should sort of read these lines from Trapped. Cloistered, claustrophobic, I cohabit with don't, for I cannot say I won't. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Always innovative, always inventive. Her students are always in awe of her. So Choitali Moitro holds a PhD from the West Bengal State University and an MPhil from Jadavpur. She's taught at Presidency University for more than 30 years and currently teaches at St. Paul's in Kolkata. Her thrust area of travel literature, 19th century America. Choitali, very proud of you. This is awesome. Thank you so much. The icing on the cake is hopefully going to be 2 quick poems from you.
Okay.
Shaptaparna, go right ahead.
I feel an almost irresistible temptation to read several, but I will restrain and restrict myself to only 2. The title of the first poem is Dronacharya, the teacher of princes. Dronacharya, the pet pedagogue of the king's court, neither a friend nor a philosopher, not even a guide. Dronacharya, the glamorized bonded labor leashed to the regal court. This teacher, treacherous, traitorous, equivocator, a pet puppet of kings and princes, an Alsatian mind guided by his master's voice, a fan of casteism and hierarchy, a security guard of the monarchy, in the name of dharma, the unethical super master of archery, sensing the royal prince Arjuna, was no match to Eklavya's skills. Dronacharya, the revered teacher, stole the tribal boy's thumb to save his job. If Eklavya had rained a dozen arrows into Drona's heart, the grand Indian epic would have celebrated meritocracy instead of the arrogance of aristocracy. But no one shouted out then, Eklavyas of the world, unite. 1,000 Eklavyas with their fast and furious arrows could have targeted the marrows of those who claimed to fame was just the accident of birth. Since that day of mutilation, the treacherous teacher could not sleep. Some said the nagging nightmare of hundreds and hundreds of blood-smeared thumbs spiraling around him kept him awake all night. The last one is titled Manipur. He moans again. The sacred heart sheds tears of blood, for they yet again know not what they do. He moans again as the barbarians bare their canine teeth. Cry, bejeweled Manipur. Cry, beloved land, your innocent people, denuded, devastated, ravished, abused, drenched in blood, branded blood groups in a killing spree, all in the name of God. Structures with spires, structures with domes, structures with symbols, stone deaf to prayers, blind and dumb as rivers of innocent blood flow into the sea of womb. Cries, screams, tears, drown in the ferocious fury. Bullets spit death, knives drip blood, ballots are absurd. Stripped and raped, they still walk on. They walk on, they walk into our hearts and minds as we are now all in one. Iram Chanung Sharmila, Thangjam Manorama Devi haunt the air of bejeweled Manipur. Are you listening? Land of jewels, mourning Manipur has lost count of the bodies lying lifeless everywhere. Maniacs and murderers mutilate Manipur. Manipur is burning. Manipur is weeping. Manipur is torn apart. The displaced homeless shiver and tremble in makeshift tents under gloomy skies. Are you listening? The silence of India, often more ear-splitting than speech. Are you listening? Thank you.
So one poem by the authoress, by the poet.
I really don't know whether I should read a poem or just... I don't know whether I have written these poems now. Yes? And all the professorial discourse really has made my poems very tough to me. Yes? So long I thought, okay, I probably understood them a little, but now I think I will have to really sit down and reread them. So I'm overwhelmed really to see so many of my friends here and my young friends, that is my research scholars, my students, and of course my family members. This is probably the first time I see them here in a session where I have been speaking, whether it is my own book or somebody else's. So I'm really very, very happy to have my family members here today. And I hope you will carry this message to my son, that I'm not as disastrous as he imagines. So with that, I will just read one poem which Shayantan was referring to. And this is a poem, I suppose it's going on all the time, even at this moment. Bombs are being dropped in the Rafah border. So this is a poem. It's not really a poem, really. It is an appeal to every human being that we must stop this war. We must call for a ceasefire. It is impossible to accept that 36,000 people have been killed for no fault of theirs, out of which 18,000 are children. So I'll read this book. In the Holy Land, vultures are circling in the blue skies. The Holy Land stands petrified. Sacrilege and sacrifice lie scattered. Cries and screams of dying children rend the toxic air. There is no water. There is no food. There is no shelter, there is no safety. There is rubble everywhere. Fathers scramble for a slice of bread. Mothers wish their breasts had milk. Children cry and shudder and starve. Children die every hour, torn to bits. In all holy rule books, killing is a sin. Savagery sweeps over the Gaza Strip as never before. Bethlehem and Jerusalem watch in hopeless grief, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Inhuman animals bomb and gun down every innocent child. every shelter, every camp, all burn in the fire of frenzy in the killing fields of Gaza.
We've just about 10 minutes across 8, which was our timeline. But would be great to hear from you as an audience. If you have any questions, comments, please go ahead. Someone break the ice on the floor? Yes? Harish? Thank you.
I'm sorry I missed most of this session, but the little that I got gave me the distinct impression that what you're talking about is a story rooted in an Indian myth, but that myth is very universal. I mean, in the Grecian world you had this character called Diomedes. You're familiar with him and how he was a marginalized hero who didn't fit into the prevailing Homeric conceptions of what a Greek hero should be. So, but then coming back to our own country where we have marginalized figures in every nook and cranny, marginalized figures, if you look at many political scenarios in many global geographies, you'll always find many such characters. So I just thought I'd say a few lines about the globalization of a marginalized who is a victim of priestly power play or the power of the higher born castes. Thank you.
This is to Shanjukta Di. I mean, she's been a mentor, guide, teacher, professor, everything. And she's also given her right thumb to all of us. Okay. That's how we've been sort of brought up by her, all her students. And I think I'm the oldest student you have over here, the eldest and the oldest. So we grew up, when we were doing literature, we grew up with this whole question that was given to us, can the subaltern speak? And we were growing up on that essay. Everybody was reading that, can the subaltern speak? And Shanjukta Di suddenly out of the blue answered that. You know, I get the feeling that this is the answer that we were waiting for. And the other thing that I like, Choitali mentioned it already about the hope, but I think it's somehow very inspirational, all your poems. You have these mythical figures, marginalized, you know, the others, and the way you inspire them to sort of speak. So speech is the word that is very important over here, articulation. And you're giving that power and that inspiration. So I think it is also very radical. So all these things are coming into my mind, and thank you, Shanjukta Di. I'm so glad I'm here today.
Yes, as Gautam Babu pointed out, sitting right next to me, I'm also one of her students. And some of you know that there is a group called Admirers of Shanjukta Dasgupta on Facebook. Though she's not on Facebook, pictures keep appearing, and there are snippets of conversations. There are, you know, newspaper articles, etc., that I keep on posting. Others also can post, but I have to approve along with the other admin. So yes, just adding to what Kabiri Di just said, she has also been my teacher at Calcutta University. Since I know, I you know, keep on talking to her because I have to get the data for the Facebook Admirers group. I remember receiving the first cover of the book, and it was just titled Eklavya. And a few days later, Sritunni is also here, a few days later another cover came, which I had to publicize. I did it on my own. I don't get paid for it, mind you. So, yes, so there came another cover which said that the title has been changed to Eklavya Speaks. So just as Kaviridi pointed out, this indeed has been Shangyuktadi's answer to Can the Subaltern Speak? And I had noted this down. I've sent this as a review, where I have actually written, representing all subaltern men and women in Dasgupta's collection of poems, Eklavya Speaks, Shambhuka's silence raises questions, Karna expresses rage, Shikhandi speaks, Chuni Kotal queries, Shidhu and Kanu challenge oppression. And in quite a few of her poems, including Accident of Birth, Dasgupta actually uses the term accident of birth. Dasgupta appeals to Mahatma Gandhi in Bapu, to Ambedkar in The Constitution Maker, B.R. Ambedkar, and to Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar in The Pathfinder, to free the minds of all Indians of all discriminations and prejudices. So this is a book, as Professor Shayantun Dasgupta pointed out, caste and varna. It has been here in India for ages on end, since time immemorial. So yes, we are with you when you question these age-old prejudices. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
What a beautifully discerning evening, Shanjukta Di, Julie Di, thank you. It's always a little daunting for me to speak in front of so many academics, because I'm a non-academic, as you all know, but I do write poetry. And what I've always admired about Shanjukta Di is what she beautifully describes in the foreword, literary activism. I've always believed, and I believe this from my heart, that what use is any education if we don't have a voice. And Shanjukta Di, I'm not a literature student, I have not been taught by you, but I learn, like Eklavya, from you and from you, Julie Di, and from all of you every day, the art of having a voice. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ipshita. Is there anybody else? There's so many of you who write poetry, who are in IPPL. No? Let me just turn to our hybrid supporters. Shibunti, if you can hear me, oh wonderful. Paramita, are you there? Waiting a long time, I know.
Can I say something? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead. Please
Hi.
introduce yourself.
Hi, this is Urna Bose.
Hi, go ahead.
Yeah, so I am from Mumbai. I'm joining in from Mumbai. And I'd like to say that Emily Dickinson wrote, "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies, too bright for our infirm delight. The truth's superb surprise." I think Shangjukta Di lays bare many foundational truths of our culture, and she takes these truths a few notches higher than Emily Dickinson's idea of truth-telling. And I feel I'm yet to read the book, but having attended the session, and yes, I've bunked work to attend the session today, I feel Shangjukta Di has dipped her stirring pen into the thickened blood of generational pain, suppression, and the truths of the prolonged subliminal resistance of the Dalits and other marginalized castes. One of the primary leitmotifs of her poetry is the theme of overt and covert subversion of Hindu mythology. A mythology which is almost like a library that has been fed to us in spite of our inherent human questioning. I think Mahabharata was fed to us at a certain age almost like gospel truths. And this almost shameless perpetuation of caste hierarchies and the employment of sly cunning and guile to keep varnas and castes tightly in their grooves. And I just love this discussion, and I'm going to get the book because I think Shangjukta Di has pretty much turned the table on what has been fed to us also generationally, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I don't know you, but I must say you were so eloquent. Possibly, I don't know what you do for a living, but if you journalist and poet, well done. So if you want to give up your day job, I think you have an alternative profession as a professional reviewer. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Julie. I do know you, however. I do know you and know of you, and I've attended many of your sessions, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyone else? We can call it a day. Huh? Paramita, I don't know if Paramita's there anymore, I think. Debashish, you're here. That's wonderful. Debashish Lahiri?
I am, Juridi, ultimately.
Lovely. Would you like to say a few words, Debashish? Did you catch some of
Well, I missed much of it, but I want to congratulate Shangjukta Di for her book. It's a wonderful book, actually. I don't want to take much time talking about it at the end of the show, but congratulations to Shangjukta Di, and she's an inspiration. All of us should follow her in the sense that she inspires us to be creative, to keep expressing ourselves in whatever form or shape. When the world is going bonkers trying to kill each other, we should write more poetry, paint more pictures, and generally inspire ourselves to be more creative, have a more, you might say, holistic and of course a positive response to the world. I mean, she's an inspiration. So thank you, Shangjukta Di, thank you, Julie Di, for having me say a few words at the end of the show. Thank you so much.
So thank you, all of you from the virtual space. And some of you I can see, some of you I can't, but wonderful that you could join. And I'm really, really very happy. And of course, all my students out here, most of them holding doctorate degrees, but they cannot do anything in terms of curing my persistent cough and cold going on for 9 days. All of them are doctors. And one is to become a doctor in another week. And it's such a moment. Yes, you wonder to have been surrounded by so many doctors and nothing happens. But there is a real doctor here. I can see him. And who has really effectively made it possible, probably, for me to be here today. And that doctor probably had to also bunk jobs. Yes? You must have really... you must have really given up your chamber today or the hospital, and you have come here. So thank you for coming, Shomik. So, yes.
I just want to, before we do the honors, I want to thank Anjanda. The husband's always kept a little commentary, but very little. But I really want to say he has been the wind behind her sails. And thank you so much for the support. So, it's a great pleasure, Shangjukta Di. A great honor to have you here. Don't you worry. And if I might say this out. Thank you so much. And yes, we take a picture, and this is from the Bengal Club for you. Choitali. Choitali is very much my book club right hand. May I, Gopala? Thank you so much. And Shantunda, it's such an honor. Where should we do it here? Sorry to pass it. Pens are always very welcome. Dr. Porter, it's such a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Here is a copy of our book.
Please request. No, তুমি let him read. Just তুমি ধরবে কি? তুমি এদিকে চলে এসো। নালে No, let him not get up. ওইখানে ছাপ। Thank you for having me. Thank you for having this event. Thank you for coming. And we really need to thank Julie not at all. Yes, I think a big No. Thank you.